What's going on, folks? Before we get into the episode, I want to make all the standard reminders that you've heard here before about the importance of liking and commenting and subscribing. There's a Patreon page dedicated to the podcast if you want to directly help out. There's a $1 tip jar to show some support. There's also a $3 level where you get the Stop the Presses episodes early and working on some other things for that. But other than that, the comments, the likes, all help other people find the podcast, which helps me out, which helps you out. So do what you can when you can. I appreciate it. And here we go. Welcome back, everybody. The Best Idea Podcast. I'm Stephen Cochran. I came across a quote recently from a guy named John Stuart Mill, and he said, "The future of mankind will be gravely imperiled if the great questions are left to be fought over between ignorant change and ignorant opposition to change." I think that fit really well with what I want to talk about today. There's been a long-running back and forth, constant argument in our country over what kind of country we want to be. Namely, there's a lot of ways we could go with that, but I want to be specific today, namely in terms of how we make money, how money is paid out, who gets to decide, who is owed, what are they owed, what value do people bring to the table, how that should be factored into opportunities and outcomes. The economy, really. What kind of economy do we want to have? Simplified further, capitalism versus socialism. I think these are two of the most misunderstood words in any American conversation. They are thrown around to mean a variety of things. So people who hate the idea of capitalism point to, the existence of the extremely rich that live in the same country, same state, often the same city as people living below poverty. Take a city like San Francisco, home to some of the wealthiest people on the planet and an abundant number of homeless people. We call it the wealth gap. Some people can, at their whim, they can leave their 10,000 plus square foot mansion and board a privately chartered plane, possibly that they own personally or can at least have access to, fly to any country in the world for any amount of time that they desire. And while there, they are able to dine on the best food, stay in the best accommodations, and then fly home at their leisure to resume much the same existence. And in the same hours that this goes on, there's a person of the same age existing in a few miles of radius from said wealthy person that is quite literally looking through the garbage for food, sleeping in a publicly funded shelter that is comparable in square footage to the rich person's house, like the entire shelter, or sleeping in a public park that sits on acreage comparable to this hypothetical rich person's land upon which their house sits. This is kind of the grotesque picture of capitalism, and there's some truth in there, and there's some circumstance in there that gets overlooked. And then on the other side, there's socialism. People who hate socialism, the picture is painted, it's not of a rich man flying off while a poor man digs in the dumpsters, but a place where everybody is digging in the dumpsters for trash, for their meals. It's a picture of a government that controls everything in the country, not just the factories and the companies and the farmland, but everything you do, everything you think, everything you say. Very 1984 kind of world is what's invoked when people talk about socialism. The first examples that are typically mentioned, depending on, the knowledge of the speaker, places like Cuba and Venezuela, where foraging in the trash for food is probably a daily occurrence. Or if we're hearing from someone that has perused a few history books, they might talk about Russia under Joseph Stalin, the famines, the extraordinary prison systems, the gulags that kept, tortured, killed anybody that spoke against the system. The name Karl Marx gets thrown out a lot with pretty reckless abandon. Communism, Marxism, these are all things that get lumped in with socialism, depending on who's talking about it. So to start, I want to define what these terms actually mean so we know what we're talking about. And capitalism basically says 5 things. First, it says that the means of production are privately owned and operated. That is anything that creates goods and or offers services. The businesses, essentially, the factories, the farmland, the stores, the car washes, cleaning companies, car repair places, all that. They're not owned by public entities. They're all privately owned. That is thing 1. Thing 2 is that your labor is owned by you, which means you can sell it. So this idea has within it like a shield against slavery or indentured servitude or a feudal system or anything like that. The most basic form of being a worker is only having your time to sell. It's a kind of protective feature, so now everyone has something to bring to market. And that's the third thing. It says that a market, which is a collection of all the capitalists, business owners, same thing basically, with their resources and experience and agendas and goals, they decide how the products are generated, how they'll be distributed. That also includes what to do with the surplus, with the extra money, the profits. They decide who to sell to, when to sell, what's the cost for what they're selling. The owners of the businesses decide what to do with all the profits. This is because it's assumed that folks will make their decisions based on what's best for the business, which would be to offer better and better products for better and better prices, which is good for the person buying them, is the idea. The fourth thing is that it also builds into the system, into the society, a division. And this is an important point. A division between the people that own those means of production, or we can just say that own the businesses, the corporations, and the people that work for those means of production in those businesses to create the goods. This is a built-in separation that is a part of capitalism. There must be a separation between these groups because everything that's produced is owned privately by other individuals. If you have the food and I have to buy the food from you, but you don't have to sell it to me, that puts me in a different group than you. I need the food, but you don't need to sell it to me individually. They've got all these other people in the grocery store that you can sell it to. It's an important part of the deal for us to think about. If you're a realistic person, obviously you would sell the food to me and everybody else that wants to buy it for as long as you have it to make as much money as possible. Which brings us to the last thing. Thing 5 is another aspect built into the system is the goal of owning a business is to make profit. Same as the goal of selling your time. As a worker, you're trying to make profit. When you clock in, you do so with the explicit goal for making a profit. So let's say you own a grocery store. And it doesn't matter what kind. Anything from a mom and pop in the neighborhood to Wegmans Food Marts in New York. It's a multi-billion-dollar grocery chain. Something like 50,000 employees. Both are privately owned. The mom and pop is privately owned. Wegmans is privately owned. The owner of the grocery store is all good on food. Okay, they don't need any food. They have it all, or all that they need. They have so much that they're going to sell the extra food to get money to buy all this shit that they don't have. I mean, a business owner has to go out in the market like the rest of us to buy things that she isn't selling because she doesn't have them. It makes sense that any of us would try to get what we could because that enables us to better take care of ourselves in all the other things. Just because I own a grocery store doesn't mean I own a car lot too. I have to go into that market and get a car. I have to go into the housing market and get a house, and so on. The same as a worker, stay in a few extra hours on the shift, make a little bit more money to do exactly the same thing. Make a little bit more so they can buy a little bit more. Grocery store owner, sells a little bit of extra food to more people to make more money. Worker sells more hours to make more money. Worker insists on a raise to make more per hour. Store owner sells lettuce, a little more expensive, to make a little extra money. And the whole thing is built on this idea that you're just going to do what's rationally right for the business, which in turn should do what is rationally right for all the people that the business serves. But we aren't, as you may have noticed throughout your life, we're not fully rational, I guess is a really nice way to put it. So just think of how many times you've heard an idea from somebody that you radically disagree with. Either you or the idea is not rational. One of you must be wrong. So the other one is thinking irrationally. This doesn't apply to people that are primarily workers. It applies to people, or it doesn't just apply to people that are primarily workers. It applies to people that own the businesses too. Being successful at selling your goods does not make you rational in all things. Kanye West is very good at selling music and clothes. He's worth billions of dollars. The man is not rational in all things. And then based on what I said, you might be thinking to yourself that anybody that owns a single stock in a single company is now a capitalist. Oh, yeah. I mean, there's levels to this shit. But yeah, owning a stock in a company is partial ownership of the means of production. Coca-Cola produces drinks. I own a share of Coca-Cola. It's $55. So they pay me every 3 months a dividend, a little bit of money. It's like, maybe 25 cents a share, whatever it is, out of the profits they make. So we can all be workers and capitalists at the same time. You can own means of production and work for means of production at the same time. That is capitalism in a nutshell. The 5, main points as best I can summarize it. Socialism changes one of those 5 features. It makes some or most or all of the means of production controlled publicly, controlled by the people, by us, through the government, like the library is, or public schools. The goal of a publicly owned or publicly operated or publicly controlled organization is that the main objective of it, like we said, capitalism, main objective is to make profits. It makes sense. The main objective of something that is publicly controlled is to just provide the service and the products to as many people in the public as possible. It does not have profit as the main objective. That doesn't mean that, a government official walks into the Home Depot and drags away the management and replaces it with federal employees. In our situation, it typically means passing laws that regulate what corporations or companies are allowed to do and not do. Just because an action is profitable for a company does not mean that it's good for the rest of us. And we, the rest of us, have a real interest in protecting ourselves from bad decisions that, big companies can make. And you can easily think of several areas where trying to make the most money is inappropriate. And we as a society, we limit the ability to do that. We take control of private businesses for the good of everybody, including the people that work at the businesses and the people that own the businesses. Like emergency rooms is a good example. An emergency room in a hospital, if somebody comes in with a medical emergency, they have to, by law, be stabilized in that emergency room. This is from a law passed in 1986, and it says, if a hospital offers emergency services, then those services must be open to everyone that needs them when they need them, period. Whether they can pay for them or not, insurance, no insurance, $10,000 in cash in their pocket or not, they don't have to admit you to the hospital for treatment of whatever has afflicted you, but they do have to stabilize you. If you walk in losing a massive amount of blood, they've got to stop the bleeding, stitch you up, make sure that you are in relatively good condition, a stable condition. This is a good example. It's an imposition that it's a requirement of private business, which hospitals are. It's a socialist idea. The fact that we force this upon hospitals is a socialist idea. The government forcing a private business to perform services to the public, possibly for free. Now, if you think that's a good idea, strip the word socialism out of it. If you think it's a good idea to have emergency rooms give treatment to everybody, welcome. You have a little bit of socialist in you. If, by contrast, you think it's acceptable that a surgeon be able to profit from cosmetic surgery that is not necessary, facelifts and shit like that, congratulations. You are somewhat of a capitalist. And those are important points, and where this conversation gets messy is when you try and talk about it without thinking about what the words actually mean. I've heard so many people that consider themselves, staunch conservatives. They say, I'm a conservative. And I don't really understand that, because they think all socialism will lead to communism, but they fully support Social Security or publicly paid for and maintained highways. I've heard an equal number of self-professed liberals or progressives say that they despise capitalism, that has ruined the world, colonizers and all this, what it does to society. But then they encourage me to go shop locally at mom and pop stores, as though those stores operate outside of capitalism. I mean, the problem, among the problems, is that we talk about these two things as though it must be 100% of one or 100% of the other. And I would ask you, what idea have you ever had or heard or supported that should be implemented 100%, exactly as written by some human being who came up with it? And once implemented, it worked perfectly. No hiccups whatsoever. I've never heard of one. Yet we have people that think they really want to live in a country that is purely capitalist, purely driven by profit, and that will lead to the outcome. And I really hate to pop balloons with a cigarette over here, but most of the people that believe that would end up on the low worker end of the system for their entire lives, with the rest of us in poverty. I mean, maybe you would be one of the very few people, because there would be very few, that would make it to the top of that game. But chances are you would be with the majority at the bottom. I mean, given enough time, a purely capitalist system, as I laid out, those 5 points, if you just have that and no regulation, there would just be a top and a bottom. There would not be a middle. Same goes for supporters of socialism. A 100% pure socialist economy, socialist country, would have most of us living in squalor. Some people in the government would be very powerful, live very comfortable lives. The rest of us would not. But using the good ideas of capitalism, like competition that it creates between us, which tends to bring out the best in most people, all other things being equal, doesn't mean that you're in favor of robber barons from the 20s. Likewise, using some of the good ideas of socialism, like the idea that we should make sure that children get an education, no matter the resources of the family that they happen to be born in. Thinking that's a good idea doesn't make you a fucking communist. I mean, there are plenty of subjects we can talk about without any real study or background in, like parenting. One need not read a bunch of books on how to raise kids in order to be a relatively successful parent. There are principles that we seem to be born understanding, most of us. Be kind to your children, show them how to act rather than just telling them. Allow them the opportunity to fail, learn from that failure, and they can grow. These are things we can by and large agree on and don't have to study to find out. There are other subjects like that. I mean, you don't have to, read the book NFL Legends or Gods of Soccer to learn about the games, who's your favorite team, or who are your favorite players. You don't need to learn about the history of either political party to know who to vote for. But economics doesn't work like that. I mean, capitalism and socialism are economic systems. They describe methods of running an economy to achieve certain outcomes. These aren't intuitive things. There is no, I feel like socialism's the better way. It sounds nice. We're all people. People have to eat, so everything should be equal. Or, this country that provides these useful services wouldn't exist without the owner, so he deserves to make however much money he can with no limit on what he can sell or how. I mean, how to run a national economy is something you've got to learn about in order to speak about. I can't tell you how many times I've heard people mention the names Adam Smith and Karl Marx and proceed to prove that they've never read a single word or even a long article or book about either one of these guys. What their motivations were, what their background was, what their goals were, what they were actually proposing. None of that. Or even enough to understand that neither system can be fully attributed to those guys. Like take Adam Smith, for example. This guy is known as the father of capitalism. Basically known as like the father of greed, like a great advocate for greed. But actually, if you sift through his book, he very, very clearly says that capitalism without restrictions will lead to very rich people taking advantage of very poor people to make themselves even more rich. Not only does he point this out, but he says it's a bad thing. Like he was a very wealthy person, but he wasn't advocating pure capitalism as we understand it, this, kind of laissez-faire capitalism where anything goes, just maximum self-interest and that's it. That's not what he wanted. I'm going to include a really good website that summarizes the chapters of his book if you're curious. He lays out that capitalism, which isn't even a word he used, but really the division of labor and the freedom to pursue profit is the most efficient way to make profit and can contribute to a functioning society. But he also clearly talks about the really bad things that can happen at the end of this system. And then you take Karl Marx. You would think that he invented the idea of socialism, which is ridiculous. The Egyptians, for example, used to hand out grain when times got hard. The Greeks used to just forgive debts between each other. I mean, these ideas go way, way back. Communism and socialism are not the same thing. For fuck's sake, they are not the same thing. Communism is an extreme form of socialism. In the same way that you can have good, healthy patriotism, love, respect for your country, a sense of duty to your community, you can also have an extreme form like nationalism, where you think that only certain colors of people with certain backgrounds are worthy members of your country. You take anything to an extreme and you're going to get bad outcomes. Too much water can kill you. Socialism turned into communism, bad. And they're also not the same thing. But as an aside, Karl Marx gets a bad rap. Old Karl, have you ever come across a problem in your life of a serious nature? And you sit back for a while and you think about how you're going to resolve the problem. And your intentions are very good. You think that you do a good job of first assessing the problem, and then you spend a good long time contemplating it over and over again, going through all the possible outcomes, tweaking your solution until finally you come up with an answer that seems it will clearly lead you and the others involved to a much better situation than the one that you find yourselves in. And let's just say it has to do with your family. You're a parent, a partner, and it's decision time. We've all been there, and you do the best you can to make a good plan, and your intentions are of the best quality, and then you implement your plan, and it goes completely to shit. Things you didn't think would happen. People you thought would go left, go right. Luck you counted on never came through. In the end, you didn't fully factor in that human nature is a thing that you have to account for. But your intention was to help. That's sort of like Karl Marx. This was not a bad person. He had first of all, he had a very accurate diagnosis of the problem in his society, because it was before serious government regulations and things like that. But his solutions, when taken all together with no moderation or regulation, they lead to bad outcomes. I mean, he wanted to help people that didn't win the natural lottery of resources, people that were born into shitty situations that couldn't get themselves out. He wanted things to be more fair. And he saw how they were, and he had the guts to put his ideas out there in a very clear way. He was a very, very intelligent person. But he best I can understand it, he didn't understand or give enough credit to the bad parts of human nature. Adam Smith did a much better job of acknowledging that humans are going to take his ideas about how to run an efficient economy and make life worse for a great number of people. Marx did not do that as well, unfortunately. He wanted all of us to live in a commune-type lifestyle, which just doesn't work with people. I mean, some animals don't take to domestication. That's why you don't see people riding zebras. We humans are not built to live as a whole in a commune where our effort is separate from our outcomes, where everything is distributed based on need, because people's needs are different, people's desires are different, which is an important thing that Marx just didn't take into account. What's funny, though, is both men agreed. They both said capitalism would exploit people. But the solution that Marx had to get rid of private property altogether and have a collective run the economy just wasn't good. This wasn't a good idea. Now, the same applies to capitalism. A purely capitalist system does not square with our nature either. Why? Because we're an extremely social species. We only exist because we work together for common objectives, like taking down woolly mammoths with spears. We are a species of cooperatively competitive animals. If it was always the case that one of us took the lion's share of, so to speak, the lion's share of the meat after a hunt, that guy got killed because it was better for the group. The ultra-aggressive among us, same ending. The most aggressive of us would get jumped by the more peaceful of us so that we could go back to being peaceful. We are very, very, very social. That's why putting someone in solitary confinement is one of the worst things you can do. Individualism is really important, but it does not complete the picture of people. We need more than that as a group. So capitalism doesn't fit the bill either. And each system has major flaws if you look at it as though all of it, top to bottom, has to be implemented. I mean, the example we used earlier, Wegmans doesn't have to sell you food. What if Wegmans was the only place selling food? They're privately owned. I mean, publicly owned companies are different, on the stock market and things like that, but these are privately owned. Some guy named Danny Wegman is the chairman, the owner of the company. Does not have to sell you shit. The fact that private companies can deny you what they sell can be a big problem, depending on the service or the product. There's an argument from socialism that people that have their time to sell are at the mercy of those who may pay for the time, the people doing the hiring. This was an issue from the Industrial Revolution, which is why we put in a minimum wage. Because we as a group decided that people's time, no matter who they were, had a minimum value to it. To go beneath that value was degrading to the individual, to their dignity. It's often said that the minimum wage comes at the expense of jobs. You raise the minimum wage, you're going to lose jobs. And that may be the case. But those jobs at that pay are not worth having, is what we're saying. I mean, the same could be said of the laws that stopped child labor. You know how many jobs were lost? How many companies went under because they relied on kids to do the work? They probably closed, and good fucking riddance to all of them. But that doesn't exactly give the whole picture either, because not all capitalists are the same. Not all businesses are run the same. Look at the business model of Costco versus Dollar Tree. Okay, these are two companies relatively in the same business. Different ways of dealing with their staff, different ways of handling things. Costco pays a minimum wage of $17 an hour, first of all. And if you work on Sundays, it's time and a half. So $25 an hour on Sundays. You get health care. You get a free membership, so you have access to the cheaper stuff that they sell. You get paid sick leave. You get a bonus twice a year, and the longer you're there, the greater the bonus becomes. Not bad for a retail job. At Dollar Tree, they pay you $8 an hour. And there's nothing comparable regarding benefits. I mean, it's not an exact comparison between those two companies. If you've ever been inside of Costco, you'll understand what I mean. But Dollar Tree is a $30 billion company. So it's not a fucking mom and pop either. So you don't necessarily have to work for some shit company. But what's also true is the good company can't hire everybody. So you might have to work at the shit company. So the minimum wage is set. So even when you're working in a shit place, they can't pay you $4 an hour because it's the only place that you can get a job. Also, only the owners, another critique from the socialist side to the capitalist side, is only the owners know what the profit is. If you work on a factory, you don't know what your energy, your work produces in terms of money for the company. So the worker is at a disadvantage when it comes to, negotiating for their pay, what's being produced on their time. So there are some disadvantages, and we have to make changes to equate those a little bit. Doesn't have to be perfectly equal, but it has to be better than as it would under just a capitalist system. Another critique of capitalism is that there's guaranteed unemployment. It is built into the system itself. Owners are always going to try and cut their costs. That is part of the deal. We talked about it earlier. One of the reason to own a business is to make as much money as possible. Not only do you make that on the front end, you cut costs on the back end. So you take more money home. That's what they want to do. So if we think of a company as starting, they're growing, they're adding staff, doing the entry-level basics, they're making money, business gets better, they start to break off to do a few different things to make more money, like Apple or something like that. Creating entirely new titles within the company, growing, more jobs to be filled, more hiring happens. But an inescapable fact is, and we have to be reminded of it, is growth can't go on forever. Eventually the hiring stops, and it always reverses a little bit too. This is just the nature of business, so people will be laid off. Long story short, unemployment is guaranteed in a capitalist system. So if you implement some unemployment benefits or a universal basic income or something, you take care of the guaranteed unemployment. This is something that I think really gets missed by people who are big advocates of capitalism, is they kind of look down on, they shun, they talk shit about people that are unemployed. Go get a job. It is a requirement of the system that there is some unemployment. The only way to get around that is for the government to hire them all, if that's what you really want. That's a big swing towards a socialist economy. So if you don't want socialism, as far as the government just handing out jobs to people to do nothing, you've got to pick your poison here. You're going to have unemployment. And you can't have starving people, 4% of the workforce or whatever, the perfect unemployment number is, just because we're going to be more capitalist. Doesn't make sense. It wouldn't work. Another problem is also there's a problem with capitalism that is caused by people that work for the companies because they don't operate as a group. The people that work in most industries, they think in the same like individualistic view as a capitalist would, which is fine, but it doesn't help you and your compatriots. If 60% of the 50,000 people that work at Wegmans don't show up to work for a week and they have a legitimate grievance, that's probably going to change some things at Wegmans if they think they're not being paid enough or what have you. We just saw this big railroad strike that was about to happen. It might still happen, actually, because these people want some paid sick leave. Yeah, that's what they're supposed to do. If they don't have paid sick leave and they work a ton of hours, they should stop going to work until they're treated fairly. In our culture, I mean, the immensity of public knowledge is just amazing. I mean, every online outlet is all over this sort of stuff. So it's not used properly by people, but that falls on people. And then a common complaint against socialism or socialist-leaning policies is the taxes. Every single time the taxes are coming up, which is legit. It's fair. Are taxes going to go up? You can't just have health care. It's got to be paid for. In countries that we consider to be socialist countries, they're really like, they're a mixture. They pay high taxes, we are told. But I think we miss a big part of the equation because they also get a lot of useful service and useful product from those taxes. So here in these United States, we pay the taxes and watch most of that money go to corporations and companies. And so we've come to expect to not only pay the taxes, but we still got to pay for the expensive shit in life, like health insurance and high school, like taking time off to be with your kids when they're born. You got to shoulder all that burden. In these other places, they do pay taxes, but they don't pay for those other things. So they save the money. That's how it's affordable. Let me ask you, how much extra cash would you have every month if you didn't have to pay for health insurance? Or when you needed to take time because you're sick, or because you had a baby, or you just need to take time off for a vacation. That's the cash they have in Norway. We pay like 40% in taxes federally and get mostly nothing. We get what? The promise of Social Security in 50 years and like a handful of other things maybe. Over there, they pay 45%. But they get health care at no out-of-pocket costs. They don't have to take out $150,000 in loans to go to school because it's covered from the taxes. They make sure nobody ends up starving in the street so that everybody else doesn't have to come up with even more money to take care of that problem. You know, preventing someone from hitting bottom is a lot cheaper than picking them up off the bottom. So we get confused here. Our problem here mostly is that we allow the government to spend money very inefficiently on projects that none of us give a shit about. Think of this, we spend our money paying ExxonMobil to find oil that they then sell back to us at a profit. Imagine that. We pay Raytheon, a weapons company, to make weapons that we don't need for wars we aren't fighting. At a local level, this one kills me. We pay for the privilege of having sports teams and stadiums. Billions we pay this. Billions of dollars. Sports teams and stadiums that then charge us money to go watch the fucking game. Imagine that. In these countries, they make more money too. How's that possible? Because they don't have these stupid perks that come with their jobs that we have over here. Like the job that gives you insurance and paid vacation and sick leave and all that funnels through your job. That's a benefit that's deducted from your pay. Either up front on your offer letter or in the back from docked wages. If your company didn't have to pay for your health insurance, they could pay you more. So they offer you $50,000 a year, but your entire package is actually worth $65,000. If we had our shit straight, you would just get $60,000. And we call it a day. So what am I getting at? What I'm getting at is we need both. You need a mixture of both. Embrace the best of both. We have a serious purity problem in this country. Our society, the government, the policy needs to use capitalism to make the money and a public mindset, a socialism mindset, to spend some of the profits. Luckily, in truth, whether you admit it in the bathroom mirror or not, we are all some ratio of each. No one is pure anything. If they try to be or they try and tell you you are, as I've had many people tell me, all you need to do is go down a list. One or two things, and you can chip this armor. Super easy. If you're talking to someone that thinks they're a conservative or a staunch, capitalist or whatever, ask their thoughts on Social Security. See if they want to get rid of it. Maybe they do. Maybe they hate that idea. Ask them about Medicare for old people. Should old people be in a situation where they have to cover their health bills too? And then Medicaid for young people. How about rental assistance for people with kids? Should those kids be homeless because their parents don't make a lot of money? And just go down the list. Eventually, they'll agree with some of those ideas, and you can applaud them and say, welcome to socialism. Or if you're talking to a liberal, quote unquote, or someone that thinks they're progressive or socialist or whatever, just ask them, do you like national parks? How about the EPA? Everybody has these mixtures. Everybody's going to agree with ideas from both sides. Your split might be 90-10, might be 60-40, one way or the other, but it is a split. This is how we justify a great many regulations, because we're all split. A chemical company can make a hell of a lot more profit by burying their waste right there near the plant. Allowing that would be a very capitalist mindset and would be foolish, and nobody would agree to it. The socialist inside of us forces them to take the added expense of disposing their waste. That's a way that's safe for everybody. And there's a lot of things we could do to take the good parts of capitalism and the smart ideas from socialism that would benefit anybody. I think the number one that I would put out there is this is something I think we miss. This is like easy to do, and I'm disappointed that we haven't done it up until now, and may never. But a lot of countries have a sovereign wealth fund. Okay, as a matter of fact, we have a lot of them in this country too. But if we started a wealth fund, basically a big mutual fund that the government invests in, and then the dividends could get paid out to people below a certain annual salary. Say, if you make less than $25,000, you get a dividend, and it can be adjusted up and down depending on how much you make. 10 states have them across the country. Alaska, by example, pays out $1,600 to every citizen every year, no matter how old they are. So like a family of 4 gets $6,000. And then for a family of 5, they have it a little bit different. They get $8,000. That's how it's set up. Now, they get the money by taxing oil companies, but that's not the only way to do it. The fund could be set up so that the government can't own more than 5% of a company's stock and gets no vote in the operations or the directions of the company. And it would be protected by law from being spent in any other fashion. And we just invest in it. An amount of money that should be invested every year, $50 billion, $75 billion start. We invest that for 10, 12 years. The stocks could be picked based on just dividend payments. We can make it really simple. No companies will be purchased if they don't pay a dividend. We take the top 500 companies that pay dividends with a history of doing so, like Coca-Cola, for example. Norway has the largest wealth fund in the world. They have 5 million people in Norway. You know what their fund is worth? It's over $1 trillion. $1 trillion. They tax the oil that comes out of the ground, the companies that get the oil. They tax them. They put it in this huge bank account, this investment fund for their citizens. 5 million people. And they can take 4% out, I think, every year, and they spend it on different projects. They don't pay anybody, actually, the way that they do in some of our states. But this is the way that they decided to set it up. But they pull out $35 billion a year to keep their roads and bridges updated and whatever need be done. Build a hospital, build more high schools. They have enough money they could send everybody a $7,000 check every year, no sweat. In our country, there's about 38 million people living below poverty. And let's just say we wanted to send each of them $1,500 a year. A household of 5 or 6, because if your parents are poor, the rest of y'all are poor as well, the money would accumulate in these houses. $1,500 a year. That'd be $57 billion. This is so fucking doable. If Norway, a country of 5 million people, has $1 trillion bank account, we should have at least double that. And you know what 3% of $2 trillion is? It's $60 billion. The stock market grows at like 8% a year. I mean, this is completely doable. It's a perfect marriage of capitalism and socialism. But that idea aside, however you wash out on the specifics of what I think we should do, I hope you're able to see that none of us are all about one or the other. We're not all about capitalism or socialism or conservatism or liberalism. We are all, if you're being honest with yourself, have a mixture. That's the way it is for everybody. It's the way it's supposed to be. Hopefully we can use this insight to be a little bit more open-minded on ways that we can help ourselves with ourselves. I appreciate you listening. I'll see you next time.